But before that, Ali, why don't you talk us through what we actually know about the proposal itself, how the U.S. is presenting it, and how the various parties are reacting?
Yeah, it's really like utterly bizarre. It's like a looking glass world. So let's try to make sense of it before we
Yeah.
uh, bring Helena on. And I'm really looking forward to hear what she thinks. But let's just go back and go through the basics. So on Friday, President Joe Biden made an unexpected speech laying out what he described as a three-phase Israeli ceasefire proposal that would bring about, quote, a durable end to this war. And he laid out three phases. The first phase of 6 weeks would include, quote, a full and complete ceasefire, a withdrawal of Israeli forces from all populated areas of Gaza, release of a number of hostages, including women, the elderly, the wounded, in exchange for the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, end quote. The president also said that Palestinian civilians would return to their homes and neighborhoods all over Gaza, including in the north, and humanitarian assistance would surge with 600 trucks carrying aid into Gaza every single day, end quote. I'll just note there that this administration has been promising that there would be a surge of aid for months. So this is similar to promises they've made before. And Biden said that during the 6 weeks of phase one, Israel and Hamas would negotiate the necessary arrangements to get to phase two, which is a permanent end to hostilities, end quote. And he says that if those negotiations take longer than 6 weeks, the ceasefire would continue as long as the negotiations continue. The United States, Egypt, and Qatar would work to ensure the negotiations keep going. The United States would hold Israel to the ceasefire and to any agreements, while Egypt and Qatar would guarantee Hamas stuck to them. Then he talks about phase two, which he says would be an exchange for the release of all remaining living hostages, including male soldiers. So he describes male soldiers as hostages when they're POWs, prisoners of war, in fact. But that's the language he uses. He says Israeli forces will withdraw from Gaza, and as long as Hamas lives up to its commitments, a temporary ceasefire would become, in the words of the Israeli proposal, the cessation of hostilities permanently, end of quote. That's Joe Biden speaking. And finally, phase three would be, quote, a major reconstruction plan for Gaza that would commence, and any final remains of hostages who've been killed would be returned to their families, end quote. Now, I can't go through all the speech, but I'm going to mention some key points that really stood out to me. Biden is very vague about the future of Hamas according to his vision. He claims, for example, that this plan, quote, ensures Israel's security, creates a better day after in Gaza without Hamas in power, and sets the stage for political settlement that provides a better future for Israelis and Palestinians alike, end quote. Note there that he says the word without Hamas in power. He doesn't say without Hamas existing at all. So that seems to be an implicit recognition that Hamas will continue to exist. It just won't be in power, according to him. And later in the speech, he says, quote, with the deal, the rebuilding of Gaza will begin. Arab nations and the international community, along with Palestinian and Israeli leaders, to get it done in a manner that does not allow Hamas to rearm, end quote. So again, it appears to be a recognition that Hamas will continue to exist during the reconstruction phase, but if Biden has his way, it just won't be allowed to rearm. I thought those things were notable. But I think what the really key statement was Joe Biden's admission, in effect, that Israel cannot achieve anything by continuing this war, this genocide. And he tries to sugarcoat that by claiming that Israel has already achieved its main goal. So let's just watch a clip of Joe Biden laying that out.
At this point, Hamas no longer is capable of carrying out another October 7th, which is one of Israel's main objectives in this war, and quite frankly, a righteous one. I know there are those in Israel who will not agree with this plan and will call for the war to continue indefinitely. Some are even in the government coalition. And they've made it clear they want to occupy Gaza, they want to keep fighting for years, and the hostages are not a priority to them. Well, I've urged the leadership in Israel to stand behind this deal, despite whatever pressure comes. And to the people of Israel, let me say this. As someone who's had a lifelong commitment to Israel, as the only American president who's ever gone to Israel in a time of war, as someone who just sent the U.S. forces to directly defend Israel when it was attacked by Iran, I ask you to take a step back and think of what will happen if this moment is lost. We can't lose this moment. Indefinite war in pursuit of an unidentified notion of total victory will not bring Israel, will only bog down Israel and Gaza, draining the economic, military, and human resources, and furthering Israel's isolation in the world. That will not bring hostages home. That will not bring an enduring defeat of Hamas. That will not bring Israel lasting security.
I mean, Ali, it sounds like Biden just admitted that Israel's military campaign against Hamas has failed, and that continuing it won't bring the success that has eluded it, so far. Is this the right way to understand what President Biden said?
I think so, and it may just be that President Biden is watching our live streams and listening to John Elmer, because it sounds like whoever wrote his speech understands that the longer Israel stays in Gaza, the worse it gets for Israel. Of course, it's far worse for people in Gaza, but
Right.
there's no victory to be had. Now, I want to just point out, and this is important when we try to understand the rest of this, that superficially, the proposal that Biden lays out, which he claims is an Israeli proposal, is very similar to a proposal that Hamas publicly embraced and accepted in early last month, in early May. And you can see the terms of that summarized here on May 6th by Al Jazeera, who produced this sort of infographic, which summarizes that earlier proposal. And as you can see, it's very similar. There's the first stage of 6 weeks, which has cessation of hostilities, some withdrawal of Israeli forces, Palestinians returning home, humanitarian aid coming in, and so on. Then there's a second stage in which military operations end permanently, Israel withdraws from Gaza completely, more prisoner exchange, and then the third stage, which includes the reconstruction and the end of the siege. So superficially, they look very similar, and that's a point that the State Department, the U.S. government, is making in repeatedly, as we'll see. But a key point is, since Friday, the way the United States has been trying to sell this deal is to insist that Hamas is the rejectionist party, is the obstacle to an agreement, even though the U.S. insists that this supposedly Israeli proposal is nearly identical to the one Hamas accepted exactly a month ago. So let's take a look at State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller speaking. This was on June 3rd, so this was on Monday.
The world should know, the Palestinian people should know, that the only thing standing in the way of an immediate ceasefire today is Hamas. The proposal on the table is nearly identical to what Hamas said it would accept just a few weeks ago, and it is now time for them to act. It is time for them to accept the deal. It is time to finalize this agreement and put an end to the suffering of Israelis and Palestinians alike.
Yeah. So
Where do we even start? Yeah.
right. So as you can see, he's saying that, this is nearly identical to what Hamas already accepted. So, I mean, it doesn't make sense to accuse Hamas of rejecting something that you also say they've already accepted. And that's just part of the incoherence of trying to puzzle through what they're saying. And we'll come back to that. And we also see in what the State Department is presenting some of the continued vagueness in terms of what the future of Hamas that we saw in Biden's speech. So let's watch, Tamara, this would be Matthew Miller, clip number 3, where there's an exchange with a reporter on this topic.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted just to try and understand what the space for, we're talking about going from phase 1 to phase 2 in this deal. If you're saying you still have this strong line that Hamas can't run Gaza in the future, but you're also saying that there's no path to total victory, to total sort of eradication of Hamas.
By military means alone, is what I mean by that.
Right. So what you're asking is for Hamas to peacefully, the leaders and the members of Hamas to peacefully disarm and sort of just disappear. What is the actual sort of proposal here for someone like Yahya Sinwar, who's there? He's a leader. You're saying him and his cadre of leaders of Hamas have no role in the future of Gaza. So where are they going to be in the future?
So, because that is quite clearly an issue that will still need to be negotiated, we haven't even gotten an acceptance of this proposal yet, but should it be accepted, phase 2, and all of these related questions are things that will have to be negotiated as part of the process. I'm not going to do that negotiation here in public. That said, we have long made clear that we think Hamas should lay down its arms, and that continues to be our position.
You have kind of moved from earlier in the war, I think, you were strongly supporting Israel's goal of completely eradicating Hamas. Now there seems to be this little space for they can exist in some form.
No, that is not at all what our position is. What our position is that you cannot eliminate Hamas just through military means, just through a military campaign. And this has been the experience of the United States in counterterrorism activities all around the world, that a military means by itself, without some kind of political path for the population, will ultimately prove ineffective.
I mean, just 2 things jump out at me, from that clip. One is that this is the U.S.'s and Israel's position all along, that Hamas needs to surrender completely so that Israel can keep killing Palestinians, which is, a fantasy. It's a very colonial fantasy. And then the second one is that it was almost a tacit admission that the U.S. is still trying to, employ some sort of comprador Vichy government like the Palestinian Authority to replace the elected Hamas leadership and government. And I mean, that's been there. Hillary Clinton in 2006 attempted to form a color revolution, essentially, and try and hijack and influence the elections. I mean, this has been U.S. state policy all along. Is this even like a legitimate proposal? And what does this say about the U.S.'s stance toward Hamas as a political party in the future?
Well, it's clear to me that at the beginning, the Biden administration embraced fully the Israeli goal of destroying Hamas, and they probably believed the Israelis when they said they could do it. And now they recognize that Israel can't, in fact, do it. And they can't say that openly. So what you get is this bizarre, confusing position, which is we're still against Hamas and say that it has no role, but we're also negotiating with it and publicly appealing to Hamas to accept this proposal because we can't proceed with our plan without Hamas's agreement. But so it's very strange. Now, since Friday, the US has been trying to rally international support for the proposal. And again, they insist that Hamas, not Israel, is the obstacle. But they're not having a lot of success convincing everyone of that, or probably anyone, as we can see from this exchange between, again, the State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller and the Associated Press correspondent Matt Lee at the State Department briefing. And this was yesterday on Tuesday, June 4th. So let's run that very interesting exchange.
In addition, the Secretary has been emphasizing to partners the importance of the Security Council speaking out to call for implementation of this deal without delay and without further conditions. Yesterday, the United States circulated a new draft Security Council resolution supporting the proposal to end the fighting in Gaza, and we urge all members of the Council to support that resolution. The international community must continue to insist that Hamas accept this deal. The proposal on the table is nearly identical to what Hamas said it would accept just a few weeks ago. Israel has said it is ready to implement it. It is time to finalize this agreement, put an end to the violence, and to build a better future for both Palestinians and Israelis alike. That, Matt.
So, along those lines, the very intense focus, your very intense focus since Friday has been on, or appears to be, at least from the readouts that you've just been outlining, on getting Hamas to accept this deal. And you keep saying that the Israelis have already, it was their idea, or it's their proposal, and they've already agreed to it. And yet, are you really convinced that that's the case? And are you convinced that the focus should be entirely on Hamas?
So we are convinced it is the case that Israel is ready to implement this deal. As I said, it's their proposal put forward by the government, and they have maintained to us they're ready to implement it. Doesn't mean there aren't voices inside Israel, and voices even inside the Israeli government are opposed to it. But the government, speaking on behalf of the government, has said they support this proposal and are ready to stand behind that, and we take them at their word. The deal is in front of Hamas. It is to Hamas to accept or reject or come back and say they want to further negotiate the deal. But it is just the facts of it that Israel has agreed to this proposal and it now stands with Hamas.
And it's patently false.
Yeah, well, it's just, again, so the question then is Matthew Miller telling the truth about Israel accepting this deal? And so let's look at the response on Friday to the to Biden's speech, which came from Israel, and we can just show now that's one article of many that came out, and you can see that Israel describes a permanent ceasefire in Gaza as a non-starter, undermining Gaza's proposal. And that report states that Israel's prime minister on Saturday called a permanent ceasefire in Gaza a non-starter until long-standing conditions for ending the war are met, appearing to undermine a proposal that US President Joe Biden had announced as an Israeli one. And so Netanyahu's statement said, quote, Israel's conditions for ending the war have not changed. The destruction of Hamas's military and governing capabilities, the freeing of all hostages, and ensuring that Gaza no longer poses a threat to Israel. Under the proposal, Israel will continue to insist these conditions are met before a permanent ceasefire is put in place. And then just earlier this morning, we had comments from Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, so probably the second most senior person in the Israeli government, effectively. And as you can see in the translation there from Israel's Channel 12, Gallant contradicts the proposal for a deal presented by President Biden. Any negotiations with Hamas will only be conducted under fire. So remember, Biden had said that the U.S. would guarantee that the ceasefire would remain in place as long as negotiations continue. Gallant is saying, no, that won't be the case. We will keep bombing, shooting, killing while negotiations take place. So it's very strange that the Israelis seem to reject their own proposal as laid out by President Biden. And then finally, let's just take a look at the response from Hamas, which came in the form of a statement from Osama Hamdan at a press conference in Beirut. yesterday, and we can play the video, but because he's speaking in Arabic, I'll just read the translation of what he's saying while that runs in the background. And what Osama Hamdan says is, we received a proposal from the mediators, that's Egypt and Qatar, on the 5th of May, and we announced our agreement to it on the 6th of May. The Israelis did not respond at that time, but instead sent a response to this proposal, and the Qataris informed us of this response. And it is clear that this Israeli response does not conform with a permanent ceasefire or with a total withdrawal of the occupation forces from the Gaza Strip. And this does not agree with the position that the American President Biden took in his speech about a permanent ceasefire and a complete withdrawal, and that we had expressed was positive. The Israeli response speaks about opening the doors to negotiations about everything without end or any time limit. And Biden said that the mediators would guarantee the continuation of the negotiations without end until the two sides reach agreement. This confirms that the Israeli occupation only wants one stage in which it will return its prisoners and then resume its war and aggression against our people. It does not want a ceasefire or to achieve results. Because of all this, we inform the mediators that as long as there is no clear position from the occupation of its readiness for a permanent ceasefire and the complete withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and this is what can open the door to an agreement, there is no possibility that we will agree any agreement that does not guarantee a permanent ceasefire and a complete withdrawal, and the achievement of a real prisoner exchange deal as part of it. So just to kind of decipher that a bit, he's saying our position is the same. What we agreed to on May 6th, a month ago, was a three-phase deal in which there would be a permanent ceasefire. What we're not willing to do is have phase one, where we basically exchange all the prisoners of war or other captives, and then open-ended, no time-limited negotiations, which for Hamas, I suspect, looks a lot like the so-called Oslo peace process that started more than 30 years ago and is still nominally ongoing. And during this endless negotiation, the siege remains in place. Israel will continue bombing, as Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, just said, and so on. Hamas's terms have been very clear. We agree to all this, but the permanent ceasefire is not up for negotiation. The return of Palestinians to their homes is not up for negotiation. And the Israeli withdrawal is not up. They say we can agree on phasing that this will be phased, but it has to be agreed. We can't go into phase one and only then, once Israel has got everything we wanted, we start negotiating on whether or not there'll be a permanent ceasefire and so on. So that's their position. It hasn't changed. And it seems to be that the Biden administration and Hamas are aligned, more aligned than Biden is with Israel. So I guess let's see if Helena can help us sort out this confusion.
Well, thanks so much for that, Ali.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on donate now. Thank you.